Further down, you see state aid. That is at 28.5%, which is fine. MSBA, which is for our first twin school, we haven't received anything in the first quarter. We actually received that money a couple weeks ago in Q2. And the one variable would be local receipts. We really don't have a good bearing on that until January when the first excise commitment comes in. But if you look at the year-to-date through the first quarter, we were at 16%. Of note would be, at this point last year, we're at 11%. So, you know, we're feeling a little bit better about local receipts. But again, the large event, I guess, would be when the registry releases the first commitment, which should be in late January or February. And just to give you an idea of that volume, out of the 5.6 million that we have estimated receipts for the year, local receipts, about $3 million around there will be billed approximately in January, February. So that first commitment that comes out is really kind of the real eye catcher in terms of where local receipts will go. And we won't know that until late January. So at the end of the day, the general fund revenue is, you know, it's doing fine. It's doing as well or better than last year, especially in the local receipt side. So that's a really good trend. In terms of expenditures, if you look at the slide, we have 34.7%. If you looked at what was in the actual expenses, that includes about $5.5 million of pension and OPEB funds for the whole year. If you back out that and put in a quarter, you're probably we're at about 25%. So on a linear basis, the general fund expenditures are in line, and there's nothing outstanding that is jumping out at me. So the general fund revenue and expenditures are performing as we had hoped for fiscal 22. Next, we'd report on the enterprise funds. The Septic Enterprise Fund, which is run by Health Director Cheryl Ball, she does a nice job with this. This fund is doing just fine. 24% of the revenues, which was 18% last year at this time. They've spent 18% of their enterprise budget. Last year was 19%. So this budget, this enterprise fund is performing just fine. Their free cash level of $162,000 at 6/30/21 is up from their FY20 number of about $90,000. So this enterprise fund, no concerns at all. The transfer station and recycling fund, that's overseen by Director Corey York. And, you know, that's been an interesting one. You know, you have recycling in there, and as the committee members know, the spot market on recyclables has been changing. Nonetheless, if you look at their revenue stream, they've taken in about 43% of their fee budget, and that was at 29% last year at this time. So whether it's COVID related or not, people, you know, spending more time, you know, doing clean outs, things like that. But so, you know, they also sell stickers. They get you know, this fund has annual stickers as well as bag fees that are sold throughout the year. So at 43% of revenue for the year versus 29% from last year, you know, I think this enterprise fund is doing fine. On the expense side, we're at 16% they've expended of the budget. Last year was about 15%. Free cash is at $490,000, which is about $15,000 higher than the prior year. So this enterprise fund is performing just fine. The sewer enterprise fund, this always seems to get off to a slow start. And the reason for that is we bill some capital assessments to the school, almost $200,000. We bill those out in the second quarter of the year. As the committee knows, the sewer enterprise fund, it's not a simple fund. It contains O&M, you know, revenue model as well as a betterment model. So there's a couple of things going on here, but the revenue stream of 21% as opposed to 17.8% at this point last year, so that's fine. Expenses are at 23%. Last year was at 25%. So overall, this enterprise fund is doing just fine. In terms of its available money or free cash, that free cash is up a little bit, maybe about $100,000 from last year. So the ambulance enterprise fund. So the reality of it is this fund had a rough FY21. You see that in its free cash balance. It got hit on a couple of sides, on both sides of the ball. On the revenue side, in FY21, we were off 10, 12, 13% on our fees. Our fee number in FY21 was $1.1 million. One of the things we did for this fiscal year is we lowered the fee forecast by $100,000 down to $1 million. So if you look at this year's actuals on the revenue side, they're at 25.8%. Last year was about 23%. And what we saw last year was each quarter seemed to be consistently off, 2, 3, 4%. The problem was when you take that times 4, it can result in quite a bit of revenue. So, on the revenue side, FY21 was a tough year. We don't see that repeating just yet. We see our revenue coming back to hit this budget. So that's a strong sign. On the expense side in FY21, and even going into this year a little bit, when you have vacancies in a enterprise fund where there's a CBA and collective bargaining, when you have vacancies and people out, you have to cover a time and a half. So, I think between some of the vacancies we've had to fill, and also we pay debt service on one of the ladder trucks out of here, you see our expense side, we're at 29% for this fiscal year, and we were actually at 28.6 at this point last time of year. I think in my mind, the free cash number of $232,000, I think the committee's going to see this as a low watermark. Again, it had a rough FY21 on both sides, which pushed its free cash number down. Again, we responded by lowering our revenue expectations, and I think that helped a little bit. So, I don't see a problem. We did go and look, and I try not to do this too much because you got to make sure you have closed accounting data. But I went and looked through the November 30th data at this fund, and our fee revenue was at about 47% through the end of November. So when you'd expect it to be at 50% through December 31st, at 47% through the end of November, so we're pretty confident that the call volume, the run volume, has come back. And this enterprise fund over the years, this revenue's been remarkably kind of sustainable and predictable, for an emergency medical service. But it's, it's one of those things. But again, this is one of the funds, I think, when we did our year-end review, I think we had put the color yellow on this for caution. So we've been trying to keep an eye on this. And again, I think the revenue is coming back in line on this fund. Transportation Enterprise Fund, kind of interesting here. That had a great year in fiscal 21. And it had a great year because when we gave it different subsidies from the commuter parking lot and the general fund, and it had, some very little, its expense profile cut down because we had to trim the sales a little bit due to the pandemic. And Manager Mangiarati and Austin Saganowitz, we focused on those vulnerable services. So as you see, that free cash certification, there's almost $250,000 in there. That fund is very healthy. The reason the revenue numbers and the expense numbers are down, on the revenue side, we have some bills out there to the LRTA, so, those need to be paid. But again, that fund has kind of, it's come out of hibernation, but we've been focusing on the vulnerable services, so that's why the expense output has been down. There are some timing issues here, but again, as we go into the 23 budget, they'll have $250,000 of fund balance, which they can pledge. So we really have no issues there. That may have been one of the ones I flagged, and that's it. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm sorry I don't have a slide on it, but unfortunately there's not much needed. The commuter parking lot, the committee had asked me to try to report back on that. We've exhausted most of the funding in that fund. That revenue stream at one point was about $290,000 to $300,000 a year on an annual basis. We've taken in about $40,000 year to date this year, which, I think we're doing a little better, but that was the other fund that we had a caution flag on. I don't have a lot of good news to report there. I don't see that fund recovering for a while. If you've been by the parking lot, for a parking lot that holds 400 or 500 cars, at one point we'd have 5 to 6 there. I think it's a little busier than that, but that fund is a fund that we, in talking with the town manager, that fund wasn't able to assist in any FY22 budget support, nor will it be able to assist in FY23. So, again, I think that's kind of our standard reporting package, and I'll try to answer any questions.
All right, if you wouldn't mind going back to the Ambulance Enterprise Fund, Jason has a couple of questions we'll start off with.
Just trying to understand, if the free cash certification was $232,000 at the end of fiscal year 21, looks like we've committed $326,000 from retained earnings in the next fiscal year. Isn't that more than it had in retained earnings?
That's netted out of the free cash number. DOR nets out what you're going to spend in the subsequent year. Because, that's a great question. They never used to do that. They started doing that about 8 or 10 years ago, Jason. But if you ran like a balance sheet, it would say retained earnings or fund balance. It would be the 326 plus the 232.
And that's true. That's true for all of these, right?
Yeah.
So everywhere that you've got a free cash certification and you're using some as retained earnings, it's actually showing an even healthier balance as of 6/30/2021.
Yeah, they net that out per their own guidance. And again, interesting, they probably started that 7 to 10 years ago. Other than that, we had to monitor that on our own.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Steve? Steve.
Yeah, while we're on this one, so I could see why you'd say it was yellow or proceed cautiously, but my recollection from the town manager's budget presentation is we're going to add 2 more employees on the day shift. My business sense always says if you're losing money, you don't make it up by increasing the volume per se. So what do we think is going to change by adding more services to a fund that's losing money now?
Sure. Well, I can give you a quick take on it. I do think that question will be one that we'll have probably a more in-depth answer for on January 20th at Budget Thursday night. But, I think what we've seen is that we are, now and then we'll miss some revenue if there's a couple calls at the same time. We call in mutual aid. And I think it's been identified that during the workday, 9 to 5, is a lot a larger proportion of the calls. But, I think that's a good question. And, we have, as you say, we have increased the subsidy, or we've proposed to increase the subsidy to cover the effect of an impact shift. Again, I think it would best serve the committee if, I get that question to the chief and the town manager, and we get ready to answer that on Budget Thursday night. But the quick answer is that we do believe there's some revenue to be captured there, but I think the committee will deserve a better answer on January 20th.
If I may.
Can I just comment real quick that I have in my notes that he did say in the last presentation that they do expect the second ambulance run during the day to create more revenue than it would cost to hire the 2 new personnel.
Exactly. So if in providing the answer, you could break down the costs between fixed costs and variable costs, that would be helpful.
Christy.
Just to jump in on that one, emergency room visits were down drastically last year, which probably explains the shortfall that we saw, and we're seeing that they're back up a ton as people are dealing, unfortunately, with the results of delayed healthcare, and people are just more comfortable with going out now than they were.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, if you look at our revenue output for FY21, and you look at how much of the year people were shut down or shut in, it's that the revenue number we took in, it was a pretty high number for a lot of the world being shut down for a lot of that fiscal year. But to your point, yeah, I guess either unfortunately or fortunately, the revenues are back up, they're back in line, and the call volume's up.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you, Steve. On the transfer station, if you could pull that slide up. The revenues aren't what I would expect. In my mind, I'm thinking, I buy my sticker every end of October, beginning of November, something like that. So I guess I would have thought that that's the bulk of the revenue, and I know that they're doing the stickers and the bags. Do they have other sources of revenue as well?
Yeah, so about, I don't know, David might have to help me, about 5 or 6 years ago, we changed the business model here, because at that time, it was all sticker-based. So we got in 90% of our revenue in September and October, Adam.
Right.
About 5 or 6 years ago, we changed around the business model and added, so you'd have to get a sticker plus a bag fee. And those bag fees are sold throughout the year. So yeah, there is, but that's it though. There are sticker fees and bag fees, and it's also, recycling revenues. But as some of the members of the committee, and I've talked over the years of the decades, those spot markets for certain recyclables go up and down over time. But it's, to your point, it's sticker fees, bag fees, and then some recycling fees. That would be your revenue output.
Okay, so I guess what I wasn't expecting or didn't know was how much the bag fees represent as a total portion. I would have expected a very small number to be collected as year-to-date, and then, of course, in the next quarter, I would expect to see it full, effectively, assuming that the stickers were the bigger part, so I just was thinking.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't give you, I don't want to give you off the top of my head a multiplier, but you're right. I mean, it was 95% was sticker fees until 5 or 6 years ago, and we'll try to have that breakdown for Budget Thursday night of the revenue expectation between those categories.
Yeah, thank you. It's just a curiosity, really. I was surprised. Thanks.
Okay, Roland?
To comment also on, when I had to take up some rotted wood up to the dump, and it's too big to put in the little trash bags. So you have to go to the guy at the gate, and they charge you. So I had to do that twice. I can say they don't charge you consistently, because one guy goes, oh, $20. The other guy goes, oh, let me look, it's $5. So there's no consistency there whatsoever, and the loads are pretty much the same size. So then I got yelled at because I didn't break it down small enough, and the guy in the big giant payload is yelling at me, and I'm like, he goes, he'll yell at you, and you tell me, he goes, I go, he hasn't yelled at me in a while. He goes, oh, you do. And that's,
So, Roland, when you say raw wood, you mean like like tree brush or?
No, so I had a rotted wood.
Oh,
So I had a
rotted wood.
retaining wall underneath my,
Maybe we could
need
move
my-
on. It's going to be a long meeting.
Sorry.
hang on a second. So it was-
You guys could talk
it was
after.
just wood. Anything like
you.
that. Any bulk
Thank you.
items.
Okay, any more questions for Mr. Barrett? Thank you very much for that update. We will move on to the FY23 budget and discussions of first impressions. And I will start down at that end of the table, Mr. Noon.
My first impression was that it was thoroughly put together and in a reasonable number. I guess I'd have a few questions. The more I went through the detail, I could not follow the head count movement. I was getting dizzy. I was, in and out of this department, in and out of that department. So I think Dave had asked for a total head count summary of all the departments, and I would add in how they're being paid for, whether it's general fund or some other fund. I think I asked a question last time. The biggest risk I see to it at the moment is the unsettled collective bargaining contracts, and I'd like to know what assumption, if any, we have put in this budget for settling those. Like, are we carrying 2.5% in the departments? Are we carrying nothing? And because if we're carrying nothing, then what I thought was a reasonable budget may not be.
What does that mean? Are we carrying 2.5%?
I mean, in the individual departmental budgets, do we have a 2.5% increase in salary for next year, or are we carrying it at zero because it's unsettled? You don't happen to know the answer to that, do you?
Sure. Well, generally, the town tries to carry something in the budget for, CBAs and the non-union. I think that, again, I'd push that to Thursday night on the 20th for John to give you some more detail on that. But I think you'll find there's something in there.
Thank you.
Christie?
I thought it looked good at the budget report presentation paper. It covered a lot more than I had expected it to, especially with the 16-liner information in there. It meant you didn't have to do all this math across multiple categories. I was very appreciative of that. Without having any idea where inflation is really going, it's hard to know how, I think the budget looks good. It's hard to know how easy it will be to live within that budget going forward, how much we should be concerned as a committee about the affordability for taxpayers, because I know my food bill has gone up. It's 3 times what it was pre-pandemic at this point, and that's not just because we're staying home. Things have gotten a lot more expensive. So I partially wonder about inflation as it will hit the town expenses, but also about how it's hitting taxpayers and how it's going to come out in the collective bargaining, cost of living adjustments, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Mike, any thoughts on the proposed budget?
Yeah, I would have to agree with most of the other members of the committee that it was very thorough and well put together, and it'll take some time to digest. A lot of pieces to it. It looks like a lot of thought and effort went into it, but we have to sort of separate the reality from the fiction, or the fiction from the reality, and try to figure out the must-haves plus versus the be nice to have plus we don't need it, and that kind of stuff. So we'll be looking at it closer in the weeks ahead. But it was a nice job by the town.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, I was generally pleased that the bottom line $400-odd thousand coming out of free cash lands us well within the recommendation that we all voted on last year. And I think aside from making cuts, there's no other way to even come close to staying within that budget. So, okay, we're going to make it through 23. Are we going to make it through 24, 25, 26? But this is a good start.
Jason?
Yes, thank you. With regard to the headcount changes, I still would like to see what metrics were being used to showcase the need and what we're going to use if these positions are filled and the headcount is expanded to show that we're getting value for the dollar. That was something that I did bring up at the last meeting, and I do not feel that the town manager properly gave me what criteria he was going to use to measure success. I believe he said we will see if it's a success. Well, I'd like to know what he's using to measure that against. And then secondly, with regard to the capital requests, I feel that this is an unusual year. There was such a windfall with ARPA that I feel that that was a release valve, a relief valve for a whole lot of capital items. And I think that we need to be cautious not to be gleeful that things are a little easier right now with a very large, almost 30% of our municipal budget windfall with the ARPA funding. So I'm not quite as upbeat as some of the other colleagues here. Thank you.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, just a couple notes that I made going through this, and I think an answer from the town manager on the headcount increase, a formal answer would be really helpful. I did go through and make some notes on a lot of the positions, and I won't get into the weeds on them, but I'm going to blend Steve and Jason's comments together. There's two new staff for a second ambulance, which includes a $190,000 increase in general fund subsidy. So the total fire head count goes from 44 to 46. Just to the point of looking at the data, and this is an overly simplistic example, but a lot of the fire data doesn't necessarily, that was presented in the budget, wouldn't bear out the need for 2 additional paramedics to run a second ambulance shift. Now, the town manager, or specifically the fire chief, would certainly have access that there's probably a lot more overlap during an 8-hour time window. It would just be good, I think, for all of these new openings to have a little more, data and metrics around it to understand those. This mental health resources for police was another position. This environmental compliance analyst for the sustainability office, the DEI officer, and I think there was maybe 1 or 2 others. So 1, new positions. 2, to Steve's point, what is in these the CBA arrangements, what's assumed in this budget for the 2 police, firefighters, and dispatch agreements that are currently being negotiated. I think, 0 to 2% growth might be optimistic in my view. And that was generally it. I do just have a couple other general comments on the operating budget for the municipal side. And the capital budget had a number of items that I had written down here, at least 4, which had recurring expenses over a 10-year time horizon, and typically they'd be $50,000 a year. So generally, I think, from a process perspective, you wouldn't assume those are capital items. They would be more probably operational, recurring in nature. And so I think something for this group to consider is whether some of these items, and I'll just hit a couple highlights, but vehicle replacement program, complete streets program, stormwater management, sustainability programs, these are all line items that are recurring capital expenses over a 10-year period with about the same dollar amount. So are they one-time items for capital, or are they an operational need for the general running of the town? Something I think that we want to think about. And then one final note, one of the town members had suggested that new full-time hires each have a separate warrant article. And I'll second and third and fourth that this town budget is light years better than the ones we've seen in past years. There's a lot more disclosure. More importantly, there's a time history of line items, how they've been, what the numbers were specifically. But new positions easily get buried in a town budget. It's very easy to have a line item go up by $100,000 in a $100 million, $33 million, $36 million budget. You don't see it, and it's lost. And it's like, well, what was this? And we talk about it. But if you put it in front of the town to say, is this something that the town people believe is necessary, it does invite an extra layer of scrutiny. Now, I haven't fully thought that through. I'm just putting it forward to the committee as something to also consider. Is I think Mr. Cadlick had brought that idea up and said it had been done in the past. And I thought it was an interesting way, in comparing it to the extreme opposite of, again, a smaller a position of sub 100,000, getting buried in a large $100 million ultimately budget. And so, but again, my hat's off to the town manager for putting this together in a much more cohesive and transparent and deliberate manner.
Okay, thank you. Roland?
So I haven't had enough time really to dive into anything on it. I looked it over quickly, and there's a lot more comprehensive than what it has been in the past, and I do appreciate that from the town and the town manager and finance department, et cetera. What I did see that jumped out in the first couple of pages was we want to spend $15,000 on an art project. And I don't see how that adds to the town, really. I think it's, things that they say, oh, well, this is a nice to have, but is it a need? And I always go back when I look at the budget as needs versus wants. Do we need it? We talk about increasing taxes every year. $15,000 here. Again, as Dave just pointed out, it's lost in the budget. Nobody pays attention. Whether it comes out of ARPA funds or whatever, I think there are things in the ARPA funds that they want to do that I absolutely don't agree with. And I think the money can be better spent for the town as a whole. And especially we got to consider our people that do not make a lot of money or our seniors that are retired. And it's a concern. I have a bunch of my neighbors, they're retired. They don't have kids in the school systems. So I think we could be a little more cognizant of that and speak our minds when we see things like that, that it's a nice to have, but it's not a necessity to running the town. And that money can be spent better elsewhere.
I imagine there's an argument to be made that for economic development purposes, the look and feel of the town draw new businesses, draw walkers, draw people, and that it's a small expense and it's hard to know if it's a worthwhile investment or not. I know when I go into other communities and I see them, I'm always delighted. But does that make me stay and spend more money? I don't know. Or if I was just going there anyway. But I take your point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and compile our thoughts, and I'd really like to get specific questions, if anybody has any, to the town manager as soon as possible. I can definitely highlight how much we want to know about headcount and staffing, and where it's funded, and dare I say, KPIs, because Jason avoided it. I have a question, and just looking this over, which I've done a couple of times. Where do the health insurance trust numbers show in a budget like this? Where is that increase reflected? Steve, if you could enlighten me.
The other Steve can probably answer, but the benefits are carried in the finance director's budget, I believe.
Okay, so did the finance director's budget go up commensurate to our expectations on the increase in the health insurance trust?
Yes, Madam Chair, the town carries about about $3 million a year in health insurance benefits. So you'll see a 10% escalator put on there. We do have a health insurance line. It's called APS Retiree Health Insurance. Those were for the cost for retirees at 6/30/2014 at midnight that were kind of on the town's books for APS retirees. That number, as you can imagine, started out at a certain budget back when we fully regionalized, and these weren't coming onto the town's books anymore because we didn't have any elementary school, personnel running through the health insurance. But when we regionalized, that number was carried for the town, and like most things in life over time, when it relates to people, that number comes down over time. So that number, we did not put a 10% on. But the active town staff and the town retirees, subject to HIT, had a 10% escalator.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I think we're good on this one. We shall move on to the capital improvement plan. We've done a discussion, but there was interest in looking more detailed at line items. So I'm just going to open it up if anybody would like to discuss specific line items within the capital improvement plan that you have thoughts or concerns about as far as whether or not it even belongs in the capital improvement plan or just want more detail. Dave?
I have, excuse me, I have a couple comments. One, I would just say one of the items as a source of funding the town manager had outlined was a sale of surplus real property. And, as we know, this capital plan is a larger dollar amount, and we're talking about debt exclusions, et cetera, over time. I wanted to gauge the committee's interest in nudging the select board and the town manager to firming up what that would mean. I know there's been some inventories done in the past, and we've talked about sale of properties, but I mean, the market's been strong, and it could be a good idea to, help mitigate debt exclusions and potential overrides, et cetera, et cetera. And then I had some individual items, I could send these to you in an email, and we did send in questions already to the town manager, so I don't want to repeat any of that, but there were a number of items, again, from a capital perspective that were recurring, smaller dollar items, and the one I'm looking at right now is sustainability programs and initiatives are being planned as part of the response to the climate emergency. This is recurring expense annually. I mean, just a question of whether if $50,000 a year belongs in the operating budget. The sidewalk program is something that, the dollar amount is huge. It's obviously $750,000 expected in the fiscal 23 capital plan. That number, is followed quickly by $15 million of spending, I think, over the next 5 or 6 years. So I think we want to really have that understood and vetted, and particularly if it allows us flexibility, is the urgency on these sidewalks immediate, or is it something that can be delayed? And if we have more clarification around collective bargaining agreements over the next couple of years, then is the sidewalk project something worth, is it ambitious at this point? And I'll just get a little specific here just because we have the time, and I did make a couple notes, but the bridge design and construction, there was a Stowe Street Bridge, $1.55 million, including design and construction. The description says, this bridge does not conform to Mass DOT design requirements. We want to pursue design funds to develop the most cost-effective solution to resolve deficiencies. It just is not clear if there are any deficiencies outside of not complying with some design requirements. And I ask this because it says it's providing safe access. And in the spirit of looking at KPIs and metrics, I mean, one obvious question to ask is, have there been incidents at this location? Is it worth spending $1.55 million to redesign a bridge that may be completely fine? Or has there been a number of traffic incidents that are trending precariously and it does need to be addressed? And I had just a number of those smaller items, but some of these dollar items are relatively large, and so I'll follow up with an email with this list. But that's kind of it. I also wanted to ask, just maybe to the chair, is, this facility, this Department of Public Works feasibility study should be complete next year. There should be a building study committee assembled for that. And I think obviously we're going to want to have somebody actively engaged in that item if it's going to be $30+ million.
Which one is that one?
The DPW building.
Yeah, I'm interested.
That was it. If there's anything that he hadn't answered before, I'll follow up with a separate email.
Okay. I imagine with the bridge and a few other capital improvement items that are studies and designs, that he's trying to set us up to receive monies for shovel-ready projects from money that's coming down from federal and state, because he has said that on similar projects, including the sewer extension on Main Street. But I think understanding better what that, is it 1.5 million period, or is there a couple $100,000 for this part, and then we go, oh no, wait, we don't actually need to upgrade that, and then we stop, or?
Yeah, it's in here, it's $250 for design, and $1.3 million for construction.
Okay.
So presumably, we get to design and find out there's no matching funds or whatever, or it doesn't need it, shovels down, and there's no shovels down at all because there's no shovels up.
Right.
It's done.
That's still a lot of art projects we could have had around town.
Well, $250,000 is a material amount of money for a design, and that's one of the 3 bridges that are being addressed in this. Between the 3 of them, it's $640,000 for just design work for 3 bridges.
Okay.
I mean, getting 60% of $1 million for 3 bridges being designed.
And for me, I would question zoning law changes as something that belongs in a capital improvement budget.
Yeah,
That one?
pardon me, I noted that. It's the recodification of the zoning bylaws for $50,000, and I wasn't sure if it sounds like it would be more accessible online and with links and so on, but I would like to see just some cost-benefit analysis on something like that.
I would like to see it moved into the operation budget. I think that Steve was able to access an old description of what should be a capital item, and if you'd like to talk about it, I don't think that a non-tangible should be in there.
I was just going to say, you don't have to use the one I came up with, though I did come up with it in conjunction with a few other people in town, but that was a few years ago. But the document itself should have that in there. If you're going to have a capital improvement plan, well, the first section should be, what are we defining as capital? Because certain things do stick out, like the recoding, the zoning bylaw. So nowhere did I ever work that we would have capitalized that type of object. And the other thing I think the CIP needs is what's the impact on the taxpayer? And I know it's hard to calculate, but it's an exhaustive document of needs. But it doesn't really get into how's it going to impact people.
Christy?
Regarding the sidewalks, which is a really big number in here, I would like to see there be a public discussion about that. Alyssa Nickel at the last select board meeting mentioned the fact that while sidewalks are really nice for the people who live there, it does change the look of the town. I know I moved here because it seemed rural to me coming from the city. So sidewalks on one side of the street is nice, on the both sides, and it starts looking more city suburban. So I'd love to see more of a discussion around that, especially because it's such a very, very large number we're looking at going forward. Discussion earlier in the process would mean that maybe we didn't need to spend $750,000 next year to design all of the sidewalks, which if we're not going to make them all at once, would potentially save us a lot of money. I would also, as sort of a combination of the SIP and the budget, I would love to see the cost of the select board's goals, responding to them. I think it benefits the select board and the taxpayers and us to all see that the cost of the goals that we're setting. There are goals I personally have that I lay out the cost and realize maybe that's not how we should do it right now, but there's no direct correlation actually given that we could figure out, but the town manager, the town knows it a lot better, just for everyone to make good financial decisions around these broader ideas that we have.
Okay. Mike, anything?
Well, I don't have specific comments at this point, but I know topics like that you were talking about, like the zoning law changes are being updated. That's, believe it or not, that's a very popular item with the EDC and other people, and it really, I think it's been decades since they were updated, and they really need to get modernized and make it more efficient for businesses to do business with the town and so on. So it is an important budget item. And the other budget item that I think is very popular is sidewalks, but that's, how much and how expensive it is what we're going to be talking about. But generally, that's my comments at this point.
Okay. Yeah, the sense I'm getting is that we've been picking away at the sidewalks and that we add so many on the list that it's a never-ending cycle of just catching up to the oldest sidewalks. And since it's become a priority for the select board, the town manager is considering just getting them all done in one fell swoop with the debt service. So we'll have to have some thoughts about that. Adam?
I think subjects like sidewalks, the Asa Parlin House, the select board's priority list are a good narrative of what the townsfolk have been asking the select board for, what people have cried out for years. And, the select board has been proactive and taken the initiative to create sort of a punch list, if you will, prioritization list, and pass that responsibility on to the town manager. But I think you have to look through the lens of this has been done over the past, 10, 15 years during a time of prosperity. And now we're heading into a time of uncertainty and perhaps the opposite of prosperity. And so I think it changes the discussion and changes the narrative between the town and the select board and the finance committee and the town manager in the upcoming town meetings. I think the townspeople probably need to be made aware through our point of view and other means how the landscape is changing and what this might mean for their tax bill. And they need to be asked the question, are all the priorities that you've asked the select board to make priorities still your priority? And I think the select board needs to take guidance on that more from the townspeople than from the finance committee. I mean, we can tell them that, the spending is less than conservative at this point, considering the economic future that we're facing, but it's really up to the townspeople to decide how they want to spend their dollars. But I think my point is that the discussion changes. It's going to be a different angle.
I do have one more comment, and I think the issue with speaking of the Parlin House, that issue is not resolved as far as I'm concerned. The fact that we need conference space and maybe a cultural center is important, but I guess my main issue with the Parlin House is that size correctly to meet the needs of the community. Can the Parliament House really accommodate what they wanted to accommodate? And they're trying to squeeze a lot into a very tiny building, and I have some issues with that. And I just think it's, at this point, it may not be economically feasible. It might be cheaper to either tear down part of that building and expand it with something modern and up to code and so on, or give rid of the whole building and start over, or find a new location. But I just don't think the building is sized to accommodate what they wanted to accommodate, because it's going to be so popular. It is a terrific location, it's a terrific concept, but my main issue is I don't think it's really big enough. Looking at the architectural plans and the floor plans that they submitted, where they put the tables to accommodate and chairs to accommodate 50 people, is no way that's going to work from a fire safety code point of view. People can't squeeze around the tables. Someone said, well, maybe the tables aren't to scale, but the tables are to scale, and I think that project needs some more discussion, in my opinion.
Roland?
In terms of the Asa Parlin House, you could get the design of the building as it stands now. Get an architect to take all the measurements, design the building, tear that one down.
Can we pretend for a second that they're never going to tear the Asa Parlin House down?
I know, just hear me out.
Okay.
Tear it down, put a slab in, and you can build a place, open on the inside, 2 ADA bathrooms, and it's not going to cost $1.6 million. It's going to cost you maybe $500,000. Yeah, $1.1 million to do other things that we need. In terms of sidewalks, there are roads in this town where I do see people. Newtown Road is an example. If you go from Main Street down to where I live in Simon Willard, the sidewalk goes down part way and stops at Minuteman, over the, I think it's Minuteman that goes across. And then it doesn't pick up until Conant Brook. And I see people walking down the street. I saw somebody walking down there with a child in their arms the other day, and it's going to get killed. That's an area that needs sidewalks. I see it all the time, people riding bikes, or not riding bikes, but walking in the road. And people travel down that road fast. The comment from the meeting we were at with the select board the other night was, well, we don't need sidewalks. My neighborhood's fine. I walk through the neighborhood. Yeah, not all neighborhoods need sidewalks. I agree with that. My neighborhood doesn't need sidewalks. But on other main roads like that where people walk in the road and cars travel a lot more than 30 miles an hour down there, that's where I think we do need to have the design to do those roads and to get the sidewalks put in at some point in time. But not every town, as Christy said, needs sidewalk. Every neighborhood needs sidewalks. So.
Jason?
A couple of things. Just want to point out that the conversation on the Asa Parlin House, which I agree with you, they're not going to tear it down, although all it takes is the Historic District Commission to decide to do so, because they're the only ones stopping it at this point. The conversations about Asa Parlin and perhaps some of the other items that are in ARPA would have been in the capital program. So I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this year's capital request is, what, $410,000. We're not doing $410,000 for the capital this year. We're doing way more than that. So let's just keep that in mind as we talk apples to apples on this. The other sort of guiding principle that I'd like to throw out to the town to pay attention to is that for some of these projects where we're trying to get shovel ready, that's fine if you have a high likelihood of getting outside dollars. And I also understand that if you have zero plans, you have zero chance of getting outside dollars. But before we throw 100,000 here or 100,000 there on different feasibility studies, I would very much prefer that we do a base order of magnitude of what we expect this to be. Because it makes no sense to spend 100 grand on a feasibility study thinking we're going to, without checking to see if we really want to spend $30 million on the DPW, or $30 million on a sewer expansion here, or $25 million on a sewer expansion somewhere else. I look at the failed sewer expansion attempt at West Acton, 3 years ago? I guess it was 3 years ago, maybe it was only 2. And I think that was a whole lot of time and effort wasted because they were convinced they were going to get it. And I would have much preferred that we do some sanity checking before we invest a whole bunch of money only to fall short. So while there are no, I see a paragraph about caring about sewers in this budget. I don't see the line item on where they're actually trying to change do the feasibilities for studies for the sewers, or for the bridges for that matter. Let's, well, actually, I take that back. Bridges, if it fails, it fails. We have to fix it. So before we bring on any new service to the town, before we spend money on a feasibility study, let's get an order of magnitude and discuss whether this is something we really want to do anyway. Thank you.
Christie.
To Adam's point about the select board listening, setting their goals based on what people are asking for, I agree that entirely. But what I would like to see is that the projects coming out of those goals then be presented to town meeting and voted on there. Because similar to the sewers were strongly supported by a vocal minority. And then when it came down to town meeting, the West Acton sewers, the general populace did not want it. And I think you'll see that that is possibly true about a number of the other projects. I suspect if you had a discussion about a cultural center, that the general population has to Mike's point, a desire for a larger project than what they're getting here. And I don't know whether we could, for similar money or maybe not much more, get something much closer to what the populace wants. But this project is based on a small number of people supporting it, which I think is a wonderful start of the discussion, but the discussion doesn't seem to have gone much beyond that. So I think it's very important that we keep in mind that it is easy for some of these things to just be rolled into the budget, and the budget is presented as, here's what it is. Tara brought up this point at the select board meeting, that people can hold things out for the budget for discussion, but that's not going to lead to a robust public discussion. Town meeting is really where it all comes down to people actually having a chance to interact. Not everyone is going to talk to the select board, not everyone is going to go to the meetings or even follow everything that's happening there, but at town meeting we all sit down and talk about this. So I think we need to continue encouraging as many of these large projects, including the feasibility studies, to be pushed to that form.
Man, I just
Please.
would like to second that remark from Ms. Anderson, because I think that's how that narrative changes and starts to change, is by going back to the public and saying, here's what you asked us for, here's the plan that we came up with, here's what it's going to cost, and this is what it's going to do to your tax bill. Do you still want it? Do you still want to support it? I know we keep whipping this Asa Parlin house like a dead horse, but I'm frankly very confused why the town wants to save that house personally. It wasn't built by Asa Parlin. It wasn't owned by Asa Parlin. It was never lived in by Asa Parlin. It was built and lived in by like a great-great-great-grandson of Asa Parlin. It's not significantly old in the history of the town, and unfortunately, it's aesthetically, I think, not a great representation of homes from that era. It's not pleasing to the eye. I wonder if you presented to the town a little bit more factual information and then said, here's what you wanted, here's the idea we came up with, here's the plan, here's what it would cost. Do you still want it? Yes or no? Or can we tear the thing down? Or can we, come up with a new idea? But you really have to empathize with the board and the town manager for being really kind of painted into a corner of coming up with a solution, because we've been kicking that can down the road for so many years, and everybody says, when are we going to finally do something? Well, they're really making a great effort, but I agree. We need to ask the townsfolk, do you still want it?
Seems to me there was at least one Board of Selectmen that voted to tear it down.
Okay, that was a wonderful, go ahead, Steve.
I understand that people ask the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager for all sorts of projects and services. And to Adam's point, when things are good, that's what government should be doing, providing the things that people want. But times do cycle through. And during those times, and we've certainly had them in our town in recent past, people say, I want my taxes lowered too. And that day is coming. And we need to prepare for that, just as we need to prepare for all these projects. That with inflation coming and an awful lot of people in this town, from the demographics and the point of view being of retirement age, whether they're retired or not, inflation is a big problem. And seeing their taxes go up at 6, 7, 8% a year is not something that they're going to want to tolerate.
Okay. Again, I will compile our thoughts on the capital improvement plan. If you have further detail you want to send me, do it within the next few days, because I'm going to get that together and get it to the town manager for his review as well. We're going to move on to the point of view. I'd like to edit in meeting and vote on it, because it's really good. So hopefully we don't have a lot to say about it. Does anybody have any specific comments or changes at this time that they already know about, that they would like to have addressed? Christy.
The demographic data doesn't match at all what we had last year in terms of the breakdown of households. And this has, I cannot read that. It has 40-some-odd% of households having children under the age of 18. In our data last year, that was closer to 24%. In speaking to Mike about this, this is actually from the U.S. Census data, which is awesome, except for the fact that that doesn't get updated every year. It gets projected out every year. So I think we actually, in spite of it being a change, want to switch this to the town's data, because that census is done annually, and we can get brand new data on that every year.
Mr. Barrett, the last couple of years, the town manager was able to provide me with the two numbers, the households with children under 18 and the households with children over 18. Do you happen to have access to those numbers? They weren't from the U.S. Census. They were from the town's local census.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on that.
I
Mike?
have a comment.
Okay.
Actually, the pie is not quite mislabeled, but it should say not children under 18, but households with children under 18.
But that's what it was in the other chart, too.
What other chart?
The previous year's chart, the chart based on the town data, was also households
Well,
with
I
children.
can't talk about last year's town data, but I can talk about the number. Also, some of the data the town used was from, 2000 census.
No,
So it's like
no.
20 years old. This is data from the 2020 U.S. Census.
I appreciate that. That data will not be factually updated in 2021, 2022. They extrapolate the data out. The town census data, the town does a census of all voters.
Do you think
Every
the
year.
town uses different data than the U.S. Census?
Yes, very, very, very different
The
data.
yearly census that the town does as opposed to the extrapolated census that the state uses.
In order to stay a registered voter in this town, we need to fill out a census form every year. The town has that data. I have seen that data in the past. EVA is who you get that data from. That's what the previous charts have been, pies have been based on, and I would argue that that's what we need to switch this to be based on, because we can not only have it in line with our previous data, but we can update it next year to be comparable data, having it based on the same data source.
Well, you give me what you believe to be the right data, and I'll
I will
consider
happily
it.
get in touch with Eva, but that means we're not voting on this
Can we,
tonight.
So it's
provisionally
the issue
approve
then
it?
is the households
Yes, because
with children under 18.
okay, I can tell you, when I was interviewing members for the committee last year, I'm sorry, Christine, may I continue? Every single of the 10 people I spoke to was shocked that 24% of the households in the town had children that used the school service nominally. That accounts for 66% of the budget. That was a huge eye-opener for people.
Yeah.
This vastly underplays that, the U.S. government census data. So I think it's important to have up-to-date numbers, especially relative to what we're seeing for population changes. I also like the idea of taking that data, as you have it here, and listing effectively the number of retirees in it, because I think it's very important for the
I
townspeople
didn't
to
say
see.
retirees, I said people over
Yes,
65.
People who are in no way benefiting from the school, who are potentially on fixed income or living on retirement income, are paying a large portion of the tax bills and not benefiting, apart from this
Exactly.
amorphous. But that's why I'd like this to be data that we can keep updating every year from the same source and have it be consistent across the years. I will happily ask for that data.
Well, you find me a certified source for this data, and we'll put it in the charts.
Does the town clerk count as a certified source? Because that's who I've gotten it from in the past.
Mike, you know which census form we're talking about that you get in the mail that asks your, okay, so that's the one that the town is building this data off of, which is why it's yearly available.
And you're assuming that would be accurate?
I don't know why it wouldn't be accurate. Every town's member has
People
to,
can put in whatever they want on that form.
I mean, you can put anything you want on the national census as well.
But the U.S. Census data, I think, from what the other data I looked at from Middlesex County and from the state, it seems to be consistent.
So the U.S. Census is going to get a number in, and they're going to plug it in, and then the next year, they're not going to census us, and they're going to extrapolate what they believe our numbers are going to be, and then you're going to do that for 5 years or until the next census, and then they're going to
Well,
reset.
that's next, what we're talking, the 2020 data is only a year old. I mean, that's the newest data you can get
But-
anywhere. Next year is another story.
But if you use that census instead of our local census, then every year that we don't have a national census, we either use projected data by the U.S. government or the actual data by our own Acton residents.
All related to school population?
Related to families, households with children under 18,
For what purpose?
for showing what percentage of the population
I'm sorry, and
As
For schools.
children in the
For
schools.
school population projections.
Say that again, for school
For
population?
school population projections, right?
no.
It's not a projection, it's the actuals.
And what I'm talking about is who's paying for what. We see the size of the 65-plus senior center accessible population, et cetera. There's information in there. It's not just how many kids are going to be going to the schools. It's how many households are paying for the different
Well,
services.
I'm not arguing that point at all. Any household that has more than 2 kids, the town loses a lot of money. I agree. And the seniors or people over 65 without children, or anyone, families without children, empty nesters or whatever, they're handling the burden of that, and I agree 100%. I have no issue there. So I don't know what the argument is.
Go ahead.
I think, Mike, the argument is more to the point of who's paying taxes than where the population statistics are. If I think of my 5 grandchildren in Sudbury, only one of them is in the public schools right now. The others are all too young, so I'm thinking about if Sudbury was doing that statistic, what would they pick up in my family? And they'd pick up half of the information they probably need. So both numbers may be correct. there could be a lot of under 5-year-olds in households in Acton. It would be different, but it could be true. But I would, what we're trying to differentiate, and I'm not saying we don't use both, is what households in town are paying for the taxes, and do they have kids in the school or not? And that's the only way we can get at that is with the town clerk's data.
Well, I know for a fact that we're consistent, our data, or my data, and the town clerk's data regarding, and the state's data and the county data regarding the number of households in Acton is correct, is the same. You're saying the issue is how those households are comprised. That number is harder to get to, but I believe we have to.
So, and I think what we're going, again, this is a question of consistency. We had the number last year, and we want to have it this year. Like I said,
was it the right number last year?
we got to believe the town clerk and the town census is correct. It's probably as correct as the federal, probably, maybe more. I think we should have it for comparison's sake. Like I said, both may be correct, and we may want to use both.
Yeah, I think it's possible one is showing us children under 18, and the other one is specifically giving us the number of households with children in the school system. And so there you would see variability.
Well, households have more than one kid, or, I mean, there's lots of ways that
Right.
it could vary. They're not actually purporting to be the same thing.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to get at is, but we had this number last year.
And we had it the year before as well.
What's the update?
Right. Adam?
Christie, what was the number in the past? Approximate percentage in the past?
24%?
I have
So
it.
it's almost, so it's doubled.
So it's 21.5% of households with children in the Acton school system in our FY22. In FY21, it was 25.9%.
Versus the chart now says 43% with children under the age of.
So there may be 43% of households with children under 18, but they're not reflective of the number of
Well, actually,
households
if you go right now
in the
and
school
look
system.
at the government data that the town publishes, and it has a bar for each, like 0 to 5, and you'll probably come up with about 20-some%, adding of kids under 18.
Well, I think it's as
It'll be
interesting.
consistent with your number.
Kids under 18 or kids in the school system? Households,
Kids under 18.
so we're looking for households with kids in the school system.
And those kids, that school population is not necessarily the same as the town school population, because the school has kids that come from different towns.
Sure, but that's why we're looking at Acton households with kids in the school system.
So then I think it's the school system, not the town clerk, that has to provide those numbers.
I'm gonna tell you what, we're gonna stop this discussion, and I'm gonna pull the emails that I was sent by the town manager, and we're gonna confer with the town manager and Eva if we need to, and we're gonna make sure that these numbers are consistent.
Whatever the numbers are, they are what they are, and I'll just reflect whatever is accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be an interesting to know if they are that different, why are they so different? I mean, that's a factor of 2.
It's a big difference.
That's a huge difference.
Yep. Okay, does anybody have anything about any of the other items in this presentation? Christie?
I'm sorry, having dragged Mike into a lot of this right now, I actually would like to say before we're done that I am incredibly impressed with the amount of work Mike has done to take this and provide extremely detailed explanations for everything with beautiful citations and backup slides, and this is really just a gorgeous presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think there's data in there that you haven't seen before, especially the socioeconomic data, the demographics of the different communities that I think clearly shows that Acton is aging, it's getting more culturally diverse, and that diversity actually is helping keep our economy stable, at least in our case. So some interesting data in there, and I know it's a lot of data. That's why some of it I added to the end as an appendix, because even though we don't include it in the presentation, I think it's good to have for a background, and when you do this next year, at least you'll know you'll have a starting point. But I'm willing to, especially, that is an interesting topic, but about the school population, I myself want to see those numbers then. It just wasn't, if they were easily available, I would have included them.
Yeah, I had to specifically request them. I asked for them a few years back, and the town manager specifically got them on a date when they had compiled those census reports and gave them to me. And then the following year, the same thing. And Christy, you said that you actually saw them at one point as well. So we'll get that squared away. We'll make sure that it is consistent and that is data that you're happy with. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, maybe something of an irregular motion, but I would like to,
Hold on a second. Page 8, there's underneath the slide, underneath the graph, there's an erroneous 1 hanging there.
Well, I say that again. I can't, with your mask, I don't know what you're saying.
On page 8,
Okay.
Page 8, there's an erroneous 1 hanging above Acton is projecting.
yeah, there's just like a 1. I don't know if it's in the speaker's notes or in this slide,
Might be, I don't know.
like a number 1.
Just a second.
The revenue sources FY22 slide on page 8.
yeah.
So, so you see it? Oh,
This is it on the printout?
Okay.
It's not.
anything else?
It's page 8.
No,
Okay,
Mike did a
good.
great job.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Steve?
So I would like to move that we approve the point of view with the exception that a chart with showing the percentage of Acton households who have children within the school system may be added at the chair's discretion.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in, yeah,
Well,
go.
one comment I
Yes.
had. I think this is going to be an interesting topic, and I think it's going to have some implications about not only the future, but the past, once we get those numbers. It's more than just having the right numbers. I think how they were compiled and by who and how they were used, and I think we may not. I think the problem might be more complex than we realize. I just think, I'm predicting it's going to have repercussions.
Okay, I think that the numbers that I got from the town manager were probably good numbers, but we can absolutely discuss that. Christy?
I think often we would have debate before we voted. And at this point, I would like to debate that, I would like to argue that this chart that we're discussing right now, this pie chart actually be removed. So I think this slide should be open for discussion. My amendment would be that this slide be open for discussion at a later date once we have the data. As I've said previously, this is not directly comparable to what we have done in other presentations and will not be repeatable for next year's presentation of actual up-to-date data. So I would recommend that we amend the motion to not include approving this slide, but to approve, they changed this slide at the next meeting.
Slide, specifically, the slide is on what page?
Page 6, our town household data. I would like to hold that for further discussion.
Okay, so it's the pie chart in the corner.
Yes, the bottom pie chart.
Do I have a second for that? I will second that. Do we vote?
Procedurally, it's okay.
We need to
so-
vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All those in favor of having, of
Well, we
approved.
could have discussion.
Oh, do we do, discussion? Discussion on the amendment. No? Steve?
I mean, I have no problem with the amendment, except I believe it's mid-December. And if this document takes much longer to get out, we might as well call it the FY24
Agreed.
point of view. So I'm thinking we need to get somewhere tonight. But that's my only objection to the amendment.
So also, you guys don't have, there's no comment about the free cash or the debt service?
Did you want us to have comments about the free cash and the debt service?
Well, I mean, you agree with that, that's correct?
It looked good to me. You did have a, okay. Can we withdraw the amendment and the vote for a minute?
Yes, amendment withdrawn.
I withdraw. Let's discuss this first.
I withdraw, and whoever seconded needs to withdraw.
You guys just seconded the non-amendment. Just withdraw please withdraw momentarily. It occurs to me, since Mike brought this up, that on one of these pages, you have a question about the reserves in the document. Is that correct?
Right.
What page is that on?
It's on the slide 11. Probably the notes. New notes.
Where was it?
Actually, reserves. Yeah, actually, it's slide 10. It's the free cash, and the question has to do with the 3% floor, the 5% ceiling, doing the 3% of 107 million. You know, that calculation is, we have to talk about that.
What page is that on? I'm sorry.
10.
Maybe it's an older copy I was looking at where you were questioning whether or not we needed to actually allow for another 1.6 million to be spent in order to get
Right.
to our 3%
If you
floor.
do the math, it's like 1.6 million. Are we comfortable with that?
But I don't see it.
Mike, I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, originally, you're in your, wait a minute, it's not the chart, but it's the slide with the words, what is it? Debt service.
Let me try.
Well, actually, it has to do with what we,
I think,
some older,
I think what the question is we currently have $4.8 million worth of free cash, and 3% of 110 million is whatever, 3.3, 3.2 million. So what I think Mike is asking, are we okay with that 1.5 or 1.6 million dollars being spent? Personally, I'm not, but I don't believe that this implies that.
So on page 22,
Okay.
he actually has a FinCom discussion point.
I know I read it
Basically-
somewhere.
I read it too, which is why I wanted to withdraw and rediscuss, because we needed to resolve this before we moved forward. So at this point, the town manager is asking for $468,000 out of free cash for capital improvement. but there's more than that available. So when we go to discuss at ALG, how much are we willing to go down to?
But are we saying there's more available because that's the difference between the 3% floor and how much is sitting there?
No, you still have to justify every dollar of it.
Right.
It's not, you don't get it because it's a difference between,
Right.
you can argue the other way and say, we prefer you to go up to the 5% ceiling, cut your budget. They're guidelines, they're not,
Or
they
do
don't authorize spending.
Or do we, at one point, we discussed going down to the floor regularly, the floor of 3% regularly, and offsetting taxpayer costs.
Even with the floor of 3%, I think it gives the town manager more money than we want to give him. And I think it was how we worded our policy.
Well, I think it just depends on how we decide to allocate the money at ALG to pay for the budget. Is that accurate?
Well, in the end, what matters is how town meeting decides to vote.
Right.
ALG it's a plan.
Sure.
So the policy merely says you should stay between 3% and 5%. It doesn't authorize anybody to spend any money. So my view is, no, I don't have a problem with this, the way it's written. If the town manager wants to go down to 3%, then he's going to have to justify it. It's not nothing's automatic here.
Right, as Mr. Martin pointed out, it's not a slush fund.
Yeah.
It has to be accounted for, and, okay. And at this point, he's only allocated $468,000. Okay, so I think any other thoughts on that point? No. Okay. So I think we can remove the FinCom discussion point, unless you have any reservations, Mike? You good?
No?
From page 22. Anything else? Okay. Back to,
Can we revise the
One other
motion?
question was,
Oh,
yep,
we said at one point, no hiring. I think we have to fine tune that comment.
is it written, is it in our recommendations for this year?
It was, I think I might have,
Did you take it out in response to?
I didn't take it out, but I think I might have changed the words a little bit to soften it, but I did it on my own, not with,
Yeah, I liked the way you reworded it.
What page?
with staffing. We say no non-essential new hires. Limit hiring wherever possible.
Yes.
It's kind of basic.
I thought it covered the
And I
delta.
think the town manager in his new budget has, not, I wouldn't say aggressive hiring, but he needs to hire. They need, town engineers and things like that, they need to get those people on board.
Is this where we say that we want to see the justification, the metrics that he's going to use to justify? And
Do we want to see justification for backfilled positions that he's held off on, filling because of the pandemic? And
if it's a net new head count,
so only if it's net new from when?
Jason, use the mic.
sorry. Year over year, net new.
So,
If somebody leaves in the year and his plan is to rehire, to replenish that, no, we don't need to revisit it.
Okay.
But if it's year over year net new headcount,
Yeah.
that is an ongoing obligation to the taxpayers, to the taxpayers of the town. So any net new headcount, I want to see what he's using to say there is a need, and I would love, and I think that should be a given. Where I might be asking too much is to then say, and I'd love to come back 2 or 3 years later and see how we did.
okay, all right, well, okay, I'm good. We've covered that previously. This, no new non-essential new hires
I think that covers that.
covers that and covers our position that we still need to be strict with hiring
Right.
going forward.
one chart I'd like to bring your attention to is the certified free cash chart. And the changes or the enhancements we made to that, it's on
10.
page 10.
There's a lot going on in this slide. Jason likes it.
I like it as well.
Excellent. Does
The quant
anybody,
geeks love it.
does anybody not like it?
Basically, it identifies, as you requested, the percent of our budget that goes to free cash, and I put a 3% line and a 5% line, and it shows for the last, 5 years, 6 years, how Mr. Barrett has kept within that parameter. He's doing good.
I'm sorry to bring this up right now, and I know I've asked this question 1,000 times in the past, and Mr. Barrett, I apologize. In this, let's take the 2023 line item here in the chart on slide 10, the $110,555 for the total budget. That number includes or excludes the enterprise funds?
Excludes.
Okay.
That's just general fund, town and school.
That's what I thought, and I know I've asked the question 1,000 times. Thank you. I will.
Steve, did you have a thought on these? You had your-
Yeah, I love the chart myself, but in jumping forward to presenting this to a PTSO, I believe this chart will take 20 minutes to just explain what it
Well,
is.
we can have different versions of that chart. Well, we tried to explain with notes, what every bar, what every line means. But the general population might not really be interested in that, or they don't need to know that.
I think you can sum that up in a sentence about the state regulation recommendation of the 3 to 5%, and this is just our way of tracking it.
Well, send me your comments. The other thing is the chart in front of that, the excluded debt service, which goes out to 2052. It clearly shows that right now, debt service, takes 10 or 11% of our budget. However, in 4 or 5 years, it might be, we might have, according to this chart at least, we might have the wind at our back.
And then I'd point you to the $84 million
CIP. Yeah,
$30 million DPW
right.
at campus.
But anyway, that's,
Yep,
a lot of free sailing in here.
it is the trickle B not filling it in. Okay, did you have any other specific slides you wanted us to review?
I'm good.
Okay, Christy, may I ask, is it simply that household demographics, the bottom chart on that slide 6 that you take issue with, or is it the entire,
It's that chart.
it's just that one
It's
chart?
the pie chart.
Okay.
Well,
So
pie charts, but-
with the idea that the hope will be that we find the data, that we are all happy with the data, we will work to replace that chart with the chart that aligns with the previous 2 years, if it is appropriate to do so after we investigate.
Right.
Everybody okay with that?
I would say it
You need to
differently.
convince
I
me.
would say verified data.
Absolutely verified data. If it's not verified data, I'm not interested in it, and I want that absolutely clear.
Yeah, whether the previous charts were wrong, we can't do anything about that.
My guess is they were different.
We want to be accurate. We
But
want to
if-
verify the accuracy of the data.
I think that slide needs to be discussed in the future. I have a hard time, based on our current discussion, seeing Mike and I agreeing on the data for this chart. So I think it needs to be brought up to the broader committee. Just this one chart. I'm happy to approve absolutely everything.
Well, what about the possibility of adding a chart that is titled something like taxpayer data demographic? And then we say so many households have children in the school system, so many households are over 65, and how many households have children under
I
the
agree
age of
with
5.
Christie's comment that we need to verify the data from multiple sources and have a discussion about it.
I do not wish to have further discussion. In the interests of moving this document forward, I'd like to approve it as is with the provision that we would potentially at our next meeting discuss and approve one added slide.
I made that motion, so I'll make it again.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion.
I'm not voting for it.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Abstentions? No, nays?
Nay.
Sorry, did that in the wrong order. Okay. Excellent. Finance Committee business. I would take a motion to approve the minutes of October 14th, 2021, October 26th, 2021, November 9th, 2021, November 15th, 2021, as they may or may not have been amended in a block. Does
So
anybody?
moved.
Do I hear a second? All those in, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay, abstentions? Good. Does anybody have any liaison reports they would like to offer up? Jason?
This liaison report is super fresh. We had our meeting at 5 o'clock this evening. This is the school capital improvement plan. There are 2 items that are unexpected at this time. One is a larger phone system revamp. The phone system is being revamped as a matter of course because this brand new building for Douglas and Gates. Blanchard is in most dire need of it being done. And then the concept is to bring up the remaining main campus and Conant to be consistent. So that was not part of the original SIP, and that's being discussed now. It's preliminary, but it's in the mid 300,000 range. And we're also hoping to see if we can find some grants, whatever, to mitigate that.
Is this the same one that was part of the ARPA?
Yeah. But it was not part. But it was not part of the SIP. So that's definitely one of the items. The other unexpected item in this coming year, I just lost it. Just lost my train of thought. Let me see if I have it. I don't have it. But the other thing that is on the horizon that is not in the SIP, that is not going to be in next year's budget per se, but is being discussed now, is a larger revamp of the administration building to try and consolidate down a couple of entities that are currently not in a centralized location. For example, transportations and a modular. The high school would like to kick out IT so that they can take over that space, take that space back, et cetera. There's a curriculum, I believe there's a curriculum classroom or 2 or workspace or 2 in the junior high that the junior high would like to take back. So while it is early days still and it's not in next year's budget, there are now rumblings about a fairly large multi-million-dollar revamp of the administration building, which is coming down the pipe. So that was discussed. That's the highlight, the 2 highlights that I wanted to make sure I bring to you.
Did you have a question about his first? Okay. Any other reports? Go ahead, Adam.
I was sifting through some emails from a few weeks ago that had gotten buried, and there was one from the town manager to all the committees in town to appoint representatives to the open space and resource planning. And I don't believe we've discussed that. Do we need to have a liaison to that planning board?
We should.
Open space and recreation plan. which is a multi-year process.
Does that pique anybody's interest? All right, I'll look into the schedule. I might be able to sit on that one.
Do you want me to resend the email?
Yeah, that would be great.
I
Thank you
don't
for
know
your
how I
diligence.
missed it 2 weeks ago, but I
remember
did.
reading it and thinking I needed to get back to it, so thank you. Okay. Jason, do I remember correctly, are you going to handle outreach on the POV?
Yes, and I will
Could you
send out.
get that ball rolling?
Send out immediately saying, when's your next meeting, and can we have people show? And at our next meeting, I will try and fill in.
Make a list.
I will ask people to raise their volunteer hands.
Excellent. We'll put that on the next agenda item. Anything for the agenda going forward? Do we need to meet December 28th? Okay,
I'll second that now.
excellent. We will not be meeting December 28th. We will re-adjourn January 11th. I hope you all have an amazing holiday, hopefully some break from work. Thank you for your hard work, Mike. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
If you stick around long-term, and feel like you had joy in accomplishing this task, you're more than welcome to keep at it. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?